Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today, Assemblyman Cliff Crouch. Cliff Crouch represents 122nd Assembly District in New York State. That's an Assembly District that includes the counties of Broome, Delaware, Shenango, and Otsego. We want to thank you folks all throughout the region for joining us. Cliff Crouch, nice to see you.
Always good to be here.
It is crunch time here at the state capitol, time for the legislature to roll up its sleeves and really get to work in a serious fashion on getting a state budget done in the next few weeks. We'll be talking with Cliff Crouch about that today and his role in that. But we want to step back a little bit and take a look at another issue that has been front and center here at the state capitol, and that is the passage earlier in this legislative session, very early on, the opening days of this session, of a rather wide-reaching gun control piece of legislation, one that the governor had put out there, sent to the legislature with a message of necessity. The legislature took it up in just a few hours' time, passed it, and now the fallout is happening. The reaction's starting to settle in, a big rally here at the state capitol, and there have been other rallies across the state about the legislation, about what it does, and about how it got passed into law in this state so quickly. Cliff Crouch, let's start with that as our first topic of discussion for this program today.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about how it got passed. I mean, basically, the legislature was presented with this, the language on this in the late evening, that Monday night, and our conference got it about probably 9:10, 9:30, 9:45. Our background people were able to read it, and then started briefing our conference about 10:15, and we briefed that bill up until about 12:15 midnight. Fortunately, we didn't go into session at that point in time because I think the speaker knew it was going to be a very long debate. And so we recessed until the next morning and picked it up. I think it was at like 9:30. But it's still, the Senate took it up that night, and I'm not sure how long they debated it. Obviously, they don't have the same numbers in the Senate as we do in the Assembly. But it was wrong in the way it was done because this is such a far-reaching piece of legislation. There should have been hearings across the state. I don't know of any other piece of legislation off the top of my head that has this much of an impact on the average citizen, but yet there was never any public hearings on it. So that's number one. The governor gave a message of necessity, saying it's imperative that we do it immediately, waiving the 3-day rule. He campaigned on the fact that he wasn't going to use message of necessity. Good government didn't dictate that. And this has to be, if not the first, one of the few that he's issued at this point in time. It needed to be vetted to the public because there's far-reaching impacts for both from jobs perspective, and also if you look at the Second Amendment perspective, and then add into that the fact that it really isn't going to do what people think it's going to do. People that don't have guns, I had a gentleman say to me, well, we've got those assault weapons off the street. And I said, well, what do you mean by the assault weapons? And he said, well, those ones with the 30-round magazines. I said, we already outlawed them. Anybody that had one illegally. Anyway, so we outlawed anything over 10 rounds, and now we've moved it down to 7 rounds. Well, what's happened is you've captured a large number of the handguns, which are owned by honest, law-abiding citizens, and now you've made them illegal to have. They can keep them as long as they don't put more than 7 rounds in the magazine, but it's what do they do with it after that? They have to sell them to a federally licensed firearms dealer, which, all due respect to the dealers, they know that the person can't sell it anyplace else, so a $1,500 handgun could potentially be worth just a couple $100 per se. During the debate, the sponsor of the legislation said, well, you could sell it out of state. You can't take a federally registered handgun, licensed in this, I say a state licensed handgun, licensed in the state of New York, you can't take it across state lines to sell it. So that's illegal. So they're wrong on that. A lot of the things that were wrong with the bill, basically just attaching the definition of an assault weapon, the fact that it had a pistol grip on it. And I asked the question on the floor, if it had a single shot or a 5-shot clip, the fact that it has a pistol grip, does that make it an assault weapon? And they said, yes, it does. That's absolutely insane. The military has designed their weapons because of the pistol grip. Gives them much more stability for the soldier to carry that gun with one arm if necessary, as in a combat situation. But the hunters like those pistol grips because it gives a much more stable platform to shoot from. It's much more ergodynamic as far as them to handle the rifle and so forth. These are not, just because of a pistol grip, these are not assault weapons.
So it was said at the time that this was New York's reaction to what happened in Newtown, Connecticut, and out in Webster, New York, and in Colorado, the movie theater shooting,
Exactly.
that this was going to accomplish something. But there were questions asked about that on the floor during the debate, and frankly, the sponsors had to admit, no, actually, none of the provisions in this legislation would have done anything in any of those situations.
Exactly. Even Mayor Bloomberg, who was a strong advocate for gun control legislation, admitted that this legislation wouldn't do anything to avoid the tragedy like Connecticut. Connecticut already had an assault weapons ban, and the shooter did take a military-style weapon with 30-round clip to the school and used it, unfortunately. But again, it was already banned in that state. So imposing all these extra laws on law-abiding citizens, it really doesn't answer the question. And what's the difference? You go from 10 rounds down to 7 rounds. It's meaningless, quite frankly. The people that want to cause harm on somebody will get the weapon of their choice regardless. And when you look at, in 2011, there was 5 homicides by rifle. And that number is not broken down whether they were single-shot rifle or 10-shot rifle or 30-round rifle. It's just by rifle. 393 homicides by handgun. And again, it's not broken down whether it's by revolver or 10-shot clip in the pistol or whatever. There were 31 homicides by hammer or blunt instrument, more than there were rifles. I mean, there was 31, 28 by fist, and 161 stabbings. So what's the real problem here? You know, the people that are going to cause harm will cause harm regardless, one way or the other. A little known fact, the media didn't publish it very much, but in I think it was mid to late January, there was a student in Texas took a pipe bomb to the school, already illegal. Mm-hmm. So passing laws on honest law to impede honest law-abiding citizens is not necessarily the answer.
And those honest law-abiding citizens showed up here in force at the state capitol this week. And now, considering that it's been already a couple of months since this legislation's passed, you might think the hubbub around it might have died down. But that's not the case, as you will see, as more than 5,000 people took a day to come to the state capitol during a legislative session just last week and let the governor, let the legislature know how they feel about it. One of those who got his opportunity to address that crowd was our own Assemblyman Cliff Crouch. Let's take a look and listen to some of what was said and some of the sights and sounds of that event as it took place here at the state capitol.
I was interviewed by a reporter this morning, and he said, do you think there's any coincidence that because there's going to be so many people supporting the Second Amendment, being against the SAFE Act, that the governor is not in town today? I can't speak for the governor's office, but I said I thought it was kind of a coincidence. Sure. My understanding is the governor's down in the city and maybe out on Long Island. We need to send a message. Repeal this law. Repeal this law. Repeal this law. Right? Repeal this law. You've got to make it hear you. That's right. Repeal this law. Repeal this law. Good. We're going to send a message. We're going to keep on fighting. I represent good share of Broome County, piece of Shenango, Delaware, small piece of Otsego County. Good, honest, law-abiding citizens, good, honest, law-abiding gun owners. We are not criminals. We are not criminals here in this crowd. We refuse to be called and made criminals by taking our Second Amendment rights away. We will not stand for this. Thank you so much for being here today. We're going to stand up with you, and you need to keep standing up with us. Thanks for coming. God bless you. God bless America.
We're back here now on set with Cliff Crouch as we look at some of the crowd. There were a number of legislators there, Assemblymen, who said, you know, in all the years they've been here in Albany, they haven't seen a crowd this big out in the Capitol Park.
That's correct. In the 18 years that I've been in the Assembly, that's the largest demonstration that I've ever seen in the park. And the one thing I noted was when that crowd dispersed, the grounds were not littered with trash or signs or drinking cups or anything. The whole crowd is very respectful of the government grounds and the fact that it's taxpayers' property. And unfortunately, we don't see that with every demonstration that's out there. So very proud of the group that came. And the thing of it
It
is,
was a little muddy.
it was a little muddy.
It was a little
yeah.
muddy.
It was a little muddy.
It was rain that morning, and it was a little like Woodstock on some. Maybe not. That's not a bad. That's not a good analogy.
Yeah, let's
I
not
don't
go
think.
there. But you know, the bottom line is that if this law actually was going to do something, we could tweak it. And the governor right now is refusing to back off on anything. But yet he wants to amend it so that movie companies can come into New York State and film movies with assault weapons. Well, that's a movie that's going to show more violence. And quite frankly, I think that's part of the problem that we're having across the United States here with some of these mass shootings. But if it meant something, if it was really going to do something, but it's my job as a representative of the area to not just stand up with, let's say, NRA people or hunters or whatever, but to look at legislation that makes common sense. And this one, it really doesn't rise to the mark. So it's time to take it back and do something that does have common sense in it.